Can you imagine a world with no stories? Someone said one time that God invented man because he enjoyed stories. And I can remember Nathan Scott saying that when the child says to her mother or father, "Tell me a story," the child is asking for the parent to put some cosmos into her chaos, some meaning into the life. And it's the stories that bring the meaning to life. I can imagine a world with no stories. But according to the Ashanti people, the people in West Africa, there was a time, way back at the beginning, when there were no stories for the people. Nyame, the great sky god, owned them all, kept them to himself. Anansi, the mythological spider creature created by in the legends of the Ashanti to give some meaning and humor to their lives, decided that he wanted the stories for himself. Now, Anansi, we met Anansi, Maureen and Lee and I met Anansi in Jamaica several years ago, and we heard some of the stories. And then later we had the opportunity to be in Ghana, West Africa, and we ran into Anansi once again. Anansi is he's a trickster, much like the coyote, of the Native Americans, or Djibouti, the turtle of the Amazon. He's a trickster. He is clever. He's also very greedy, and even as clever as he is, sometimes is fairly short-sighted. But when some of the Ashanti were captured as slaves and were brought to Jamaica, for example, Anansi came with them. And in Jamaica, Anansi played an even more important role because as slaves who had lost their freedom, Anansi was the one that brought a little humor and meaning to their lives, and in some cases helped them as they rebelled against the slave owners. But that's another story. Anansi decided he wanted the stories for himself. And so he went to Nyame and said, "I would like to own the stories. What will it take? What will it cost me?" And Nyame said, "I'll sell you the stories if you'll do 4 tasks. Bring to me, number 1, bring to me Onini, the great python." And Anansi said, "I think I could do that." And so he thought and thought for a while, and then he went to where the hole in the ground that led to Onini's lair. And he paced back and forth in front of the hole and said very loudly, as if talking to himself, I wonder if Onini can possibly be as long as this palm branch. I doubt it. I wonder if that would be the case." Onini heard, of course, and emerged from his lair and said, "Of course I'm as long." And Anansi said, "Well, it's hard to tell because you're so twisted around and curled up, and I need to straighten you out. Can you straighten out along the palm branch?" And so Onini stretched out, and Anansi said, that's not doing it. You're still not straight enough. Let me tie you to the branch and see." And Onini said, "Okay." And so Anansi tied him to the branch. Well, when he had him tied, It was just a matter of taking him to Nyami. And Nyami said, well, that's good, but you have 3 more. I want you to bring me Osibo, the leopard. Well, that was a different problem. But Anansi, as we have said, is very clever. And so he dug a hole where he knew Osibo came along the path. And it was deep enough that if Osibo fell in, he couldn't possibly get out. And sure enough, Osibo came by, fell in the hole, and Anansi said, well, I can get you out with my web. And Osibo said, fine. And so Anansi started weaving a web and to give Osibo, he thought, a way to get out. But he just kept on weaving the web and covered him and tightened it up and got him to the place where Osibo couldn't move. Anansi took him out, took him to Nyami, and Nyami said, okay, you've got to bring me Imoboro, the mad hornets. Different problem. Not a problem. Anansi got a palm leaf, dripped some water on it, held it over his head, walked very close to the hornet's nest, and they were out buzzing around. And he said, oh, I think it must be raining. You better get back into your nest. And the hornets all got back into the nest. When they got in, Anansi plugged up the hole. Took him to Nyami. The next thing he had to do, in order to own the stories, was to capture Moesia, the dwarf. He knew where the dwarfs played, the big odum tree, and so he fashioned a doll that looked like a person and put a human's face on it. And he covered the doll with a sticky, glue-like substance and placed it right at the base of the tree, put a big bowl of sweet yams there, and waited. And Moesia came out to play, saw the yams, ate them, enjoyed them, and then looked up and saw what he thought was a person and tried to talk to him. Well, the doll, of course, couldn't speak. And it irritated Moesia, and he said, talk to me. And he reached out and touched the doll with his hand, and it stuck. And he reached over with his other hand and tried to pull it out, and that hand stuck. Now, is this beginning to sound like another story that we have from our culture? Like maybe Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby, but that's another story, of course. But the dwarf, Moesia, wound up having both feet and both hands stuck to the doll. Anansi took him to Nyami, and Nyami, true to his word, said, you may have all the stories. There were all the stories of the world were in a pot. And Anansi, among other things, was also, not only was he greedy, but he also was afraid that somebody was going to steal the stories. And he thought, I have to hide them. Where can I hide them? He decided, I can hide them in the tallest tree in the forest. Nobody can get to them. So he took this iron pot, and he's got it holding in front of him. He's got 8 legs, so that's not a problem. But with his other legs, he starts to try to climb the tree. Well, the pot is between him and the tree, and it's awkward. He can't do it. Intikuma, Anansi's son, was watching this whole thing, and he said, why don't you just tie the pot to your back, and that way you can... Well, most people would accept advice from somebody younger than they are. I think that's a very important lesson for us old folks to learn, that the young people sometimes have very good ideas. Just because we're old doesn't necessarily we're that wise or all that smart. And so while you or I probably would say thank you, Anansi was irritated because he was also very arrogant. He knew it all. And how dare his son, who was much younger than he was, who had some, as you would think, some common sense, how dare him try to give me advice? And so rather than take the advice and climb the tree, he got so angry that he wound up dropping the pot. The pot broke, the fragments scattered along with all the stories. The stories came out of the pot and scattered all over the world. And that's why, according to the Ashanti, that's why today no one owns all the stories. You have your story. It's an important story. But other people have stories too. And that's why it's so important when you meet somebody new, that when you have the opportunity to share your story, you need to listen as they share theirs. And that, by the way, is how we learn to live together and enjoy and appreciate each other's story. Isn't that a good story? Thank you for listening.